If you have reflux, there is a good chance you are doing almost everything right during the day and still ruining it in a single moment every evening, without even noticing. You watch your coffee. You avoid the obvious triggers like fried food and soda. You might even be taking your medication exactly as prescribed. And yet the heartburn keeps coming back, night after night, like clockwork. If that sounds familiar, the problem might not be what you are eating. It might be what you do in the 30 minutes right after you eat it. I want to walk you through one specific habit that is so ordinary, so automatic, that most people never think of it as a medical decision. But it is. Every time you finish a meal and then sit back on the couch or lie down to rest or go straight to bed, you are making a choice that directly affects a small muscle at the bottom of your esophagus. And for someone with reflux, that choice can be the difference between a calm evening and a night spent wide awake with burning in your chest. Let's start with what is actually happening inside your body, because understanding the mechanism is what makes the fix make sense, instead of just being another rule you have to remember. At the point where your esophagus meets your stomach, there is a ring of muscle called the lower esophageal sphincter. Think of it as a one-way valve. Its job is simple. Let food and liquid pass down into the stomach, then close tightly to keep stomach acid where it belongs. In a healthy digestive system, this valve does its job automatically, without you ever being aware of it. In someone with gastroesophageal reflux disease, that valve is weaker than it should be, or it relaxes at the wrong moments, or both. Acid slips upward into the esophagus, which does not have the same protective lining as the stomach. That is what produces the burning sensation you know as heartburn, and over time, that repeated exposure to acid is what can damage the esophageal tissue. Now here is the part that connects directly to the habit I mentioned. Gravity is one of the few things working in your favor when that valve is not doing its job perfectly. When you are upright, gravity helps keep stomach contents pulled downward, away from the esophagus. It is a passive, constant assistant to a valve that already needs help. But the moment you lie down, that assistant disappears. Your stomach and esophagus are now roughly at the same level. There is nothing pulling acid back down anymore. If your stomach is full and the pressure inside it is high, and the valve is already weak, lying down removes the one mechanical advantage your body had left. This is why so many people with reflux report that their worst symptoms happen not during the day, but specifically after dinner or overnight. It is not a coincidence. It is physics working against a weakened valve at exactly the moment you have the least defense. So here is the simple change. Stop lying down within 3 hours of eating a meal. Not 2 hours if you can help it. 3. I know that sounds like a long window, and I know it does not match how most people actually live. Many of us eat dinner at 8 or 9 at night and are in bed by 10:30. That means the largest meal of the day is sitting in an active digestive process at the exact moment the body goes horizontal for 6 or 7 hours. If you have reflux, that pattern alone can explain a significant portion of your symptoms, independent of what you actually ate. Let me give you a concrete picture of how this plays out, because it is easier to recognize in someone else's day before you recognize it in your own. Picture someone who works a standard office job, finishes around 6, and by the time they handle the commute, cook, and sit down to eat, it is already close to 8 in the evening. They eat a normal-sized dinner, maybe with the family, maybe alone in front of the television. By 9:30, they are tired. They lie down on the couch to watch something before bed. Within 20 minutes, they feel a familiar burning sensation start to climb up behind the breastbone. They assume it is something they ate. They think back to the meal, trying to identify the culprit ingredient. But the real trigger was not necessarily the food itself. It was the timing between eating and lying flat. The stomach was still working through a full meal under pressure at the exact moment gravity stopped helping. This same pattern shows up constantly in people who work later shifts, in caregivers who only get a chance to eat once things quiet down at night, and in people who simply prefer a lighter breakfast and a bigger dinner. None of these are unusual habits. They are completely normal ways to live. But for someone with a compromised lower esophageal sphincter, they create a nightly collision between a full stomach and a horizontal body. The fix is not about eating less, and it is not about skipping dinner. It is about protecting the window of time between eating and lying down. If dinner is at 8, the goal is to stay upright in some form until at least 11. That does not mean pacing the room for 3 hours. It means not going straight from the dinner table to the couch cushions or the bed. Sitting upright while reading, doing dishes, folding laundry, taking a slow walk, sitting at a desk finishing some work. Any of these keep your body in a position where gravity is still helping that valve do its job. If your schedule genuinely does not allow a 3-hour gap because you eat late out of necessity, there is a second layer to this same principle that can help. Elevating the head of your bed. Not with a stack of extra pillows under your neck, because that just bends your neck forward without actually raising your torso and esophagus. The recommendation from digestive specialists is to raise the entire head of the bed frame by roughly 6 to 8 inches, using risers under the bed legs, or a wedge that lifts your upper body from the waist up. This keeps your esophagus elevated above your stomach even while you sleep, which restores some of that gravitational advantage you lose by lying flat. It is a small structural change to your bedroom, but for people who cannot control when they eat dinner, it is often the single most effective adjustment they make. I want to pause here for a moment because if any of this is sounding a little too familiar, if you are realizing right now that your evening routine looks almost exactly like the example I just described, that recognition is actually useful. It means you have just identified something you can change tonight, not next month. And if this kind of clear, practical explanation is helpful to you, this is exactly the kind of thing we cover on this channel every week. Subscribing means you will not miss the next breakdown, and if this episode is helping you understand your own symptoms a little better, tapping like helps this information reach other people who are dealing with the exact same thing without realizing why. Let's go a bit deeper into why this particular habit has such an outsized effect, because it is not only about gravity. There is a second mechanism at play. Intragastric pressure, which is a fancy way of describing how much pressure is building up inside your stomach after a meal. When you eat, your stomach expands to hold the food and begins contracting to mix everything with digestive acid. This process increases the pressure inside the stomach. In a person without reflux, the lower esophageal sphincter can withstand that pressure and stay closed regardless of position. But in someone with a weakened valve, added pressure makes it more likely that acid will force its way past the sphincter. Lying down does two things simultaneously. It removes the gravitational assistance, and it changes the angle of your stomach in a way that can increase pressure against that valve. It is not one problem. It is two problems compounding each other at the same time, which is why the symptom often feels sudden and intense, even though the underlying cause built up gradually over the course of digestion. This also explains why certain other common habits make the situation worse when combined with lying down too soon. Eating a large meal instead of a moderate one increases stomach volume and pressure. Eating quickly without properly chewing means more air gets swallowed along with the food, which adds to that internal pressure. Carbonated drinks with a meal do the same thing, introducing gas that expands the stomach further. None of these factors need to be present for reflux to happen, but when they stack on top of lying down too early, the effect multiplies rather than simply adding up. This is also why some people notice that the exact same meal causes symptoms on one night but not another. It is rarely about a single ingredient being the villain. It is much more often about the combination of how much was eaten, how quickly, and how soon afterward the body went horizontal. I think it is worth being honest about something here. This single change, protecting that window between eating and lying down, will not eliminate reflux entirely for everyone. Gastroesophageal reflux disease is a mechanical and sometimes chronic condition, and for many people it requires a combination of approaches, sometimes including medication prescribed by a doctor, sometimes involving other lifestyle factors like weight management or reducing specific trigger foods. This channel is not here to promise you a single fix that replaces medical care. What I can tell you, based on how digestion actually works, is that this particular change addresses one of the most consistent and controllable triggers there is. For a lot of people, it produces a noticeable improvement within just a few nights, simply because it removes one of the two forces working against an already weakened valve. Let's talk about how to actually put this into practice, because knowing the mechanism is only useful if you can translate it into your real schedule. If you eat dinner early, say by 6 or 6:30, you likely already have a natural buffer before bedtime, and this change may already be working in your favor without you realizing it. If you eat later, closer to 8 or 9, the adjustment matters more directly. Consider shifting your largest meal earlier in the day when possible, even by an hour. If that is not realistic because of work or family schedules, focus instead on staying upright afterward. This might mean handling household tasks after dinner instead of before it, taking a short walk instead of sitting on the couch, or simply choosing to unwind sitting upright in a chair rather than reclining on a sofa. If your only late-night option truly is to eat and go to bed within an hour or two, that is when raising the head of your bed becomes especially important, because it gives you a passive form of protection for the hours when you cannot control your position. It also helps to think about your last meal of the day differently than your other meals. A smaller, lighter dinner puts less pressure on the stomach than a large one, which means less pressure pushing against that valve during the hours you are winding down. This does not mean depriving yourself. It means being intentional about portion and timing specifically for the meal closest to bedtime, since that is the meal with the least amount of upright time afterward to help digestion along. One more detail worth mentioning. The position you sleep in, if you have already addressed timing and elevation, can add a further layer of protection. Sleeping on your left side has been associated with less reflux than sleeping on your right side or on your back, because of how the stomach is positioned relative to the esophagus at that angle. It is a smaller factor compared to timing and elevation, but for some people it adds a meaningful improvement on top of the other two. There are a few related habits that often travel alongside this one, and it is worth naming them because they either make the problem worse or, once you know about them, become easy additional wins. The first is alcohol in the evening. Alcohol relaxes smooth muscle throughout the body, and the lower esophageal sphincter is smooth muscle. A glass of wine with dinner on its own might not cause a noticeable problem for everyone, but for someone whose valve is already weak, alcohol can relax it further at the exact moment you are about to lie down for the night. This does not mean you have to eliminate it completely, but if you already struggle with nighttime reflux, evening alcohol is one of the first things worth reducing, specifically because of how directly it affects that valve. The second is tight clothing around the waist after a meal. A tight waistband, a belt cinched at the same level as your stomach, or form-fitting clothing worn right after eating adds external pressure to an area that is already dealing with internal pressure from digestion. It sounds minor, but people who switch to looser clothing for the hour or two after dinner sometimes notice a real difference, simply because there is less compression pushing against a stomach that is already working hard. The third is bending forward shortly after eating. Loading the dishwasher, picking something up off the floor, tying your shoes, anything that folds your torso forward compresses the stomach in a way that can push contents upward, similar to squeezing a partially full water bottle. If you know you tend to do a lot of bending and cleaning right after dinner, try shifting those tasks to before the meal instead, or waiting until digestion has had more time to progress. None of these three factors are as significant on their own as the core issue of lying down too soon, but they often show up together in the same person's routine, which is why some people who make one change still do not see full results. If you cut back on evening alcohol but still lie down 20 minutes after dinner, you have removed one variable but left the primary one untouched. The habits work best as a combined shift in how the 2 or 3 hours after eating are spent, not as isolated, disconnected tips. I also want to address something directly because it matters for your safety and not just your comfort. If your reflux symptoms are severe, if you are experiencing difficulty swallowing, unintentional weight loss, vomiting, chest pain that could be confused with a heart problem, or if lifestyle changes are not improving things after a few weeks of consistent effort, that is a signal to see a doctor rather than continuing to self-manage. Gastroesophageal reflux disease exists on a spectrum, and while the habit we are discussing today genuinely helps a large number of people, it is not a substitute for a proper medical evaluation when your symptoms are severe or persistent. Managing reflux well means knowing which parts you can control through daily habits and recognizing when a symptom pattern needs a clinician's assessment instead. Let me walk through one more example because I think it helps to see this pattern in a different kind of life than the office worker I described earlier. Consider someone older, retired, who no longer has a rigid work schedule. Their days are less structured, so their meals shift around depending on the day. Some nights dinner is at 6. Other nights, after a long afternoon out or a late family visit, dinner does not happen until closer to 8:30. On those later nights, tired from the day, they often go straight to bed shortly afterward. This person might not connect their worst nights specifically to timing, because on the surface it feels random. Some nights are fine, some nights are rough, and it can seem unpredictable. But when you map the symptoms against the actual clock, a clear pattern usually emerges. The rough nights are consistently the ones where dinner and bedtime were close together, regardless of what was actually on the plate. This is a common blind spot because reflux symptoms often show up 30 to 60 minutes after lying down, which is just far enough removed from the meal itself that the connection is not obvious unless you are specifically looking for it. This is actually a useful exercise for you regardless of your schedule. For the next week, simply note 2 things each night: what time you finished eating and what time you actually lay down, whether on the couch or in bed. Then note whether you experienced symptoms and roughly how severe they were. Most people who do this for even 5 or 6 nights start to see the pattern clearly, and that pattern becomes powerful motivation because it is not abstract medical advice anymore. It is your own data showing you exactly what your body is responding to. I want to bring this back to something practical and personal for a moment because reflux is not just a medical topic. It is something that shapes your evenings, your sleep, and honestly your mood the next day when you have not rested properly. If you have been dealing with this for a while, you already know how exhausting it is to lie awake at 11 at night with that burning sensation, wondering what you did wrong, when the answer might simply be that dinner happened too close to bedtime. I would genuinely like to know where everyone watching this is dealing with reflux from, because this is a condition that affects people everywhere, in every kind of schedule and lifestyle, and it helps to see just how many people relate to this. So if this explanation is making sense of something you have been experiencing, drop a comment and tell me what city or country you are watching from tonight. One thing I want to be clear about, because I do not want you walking away with the wrong takeaway. This is not about fear, and it is not about turning your evenings into a rigid set of rules you have to police yourself over. The goal is not perfection. The goal is awareness. Most people with reflux are not going to eat dinner at 5 every single night for the rest of their lives, and that is not what I am asking of you. What actually changes outcomes is simply knowing that the window after eating matters, so that on the nights it is possible to protect it, you do, and on the nights it is not, you have a backup like an elevated bed, ready to help absorb some of that risk. Health habits that last are the ones that bend with real life instead of demanding a version of your schedule that does not exist. It is also worth remembering that your body is not working against you here. The lower esophageal sphincter, gravity, digestion, all of it is designed to function together smoothly. Reflux happens when one part of that system, the valve, is not holding up its end as well as it should. You are not fighting your entire body, you are compensating for one weak link in an otherwise cooperative system. That distinction matters because it turns this from a battle into a manageable adjustment, something you are simply giving your body a bit of extra help with, rather than something you have to constantly struggle against. To bring this together, reflux happens when the valve between your esophagus and stomach is not closing the way it should, allowing acid to move upward. Gravity is one of the few natural defenses working in your favor when that valve is weak, and lying down removes that defense at the exact moment your stomach is under the most pressure from a recent meal. The simple, controllable change is protecting the 3 hours after eating by staying upright, and when that is not possible, elevating the head of your bed to preserve some of that gravitational advantage while you sleep. This one adjustment will not replace medical treatment if your reflux is more advanced, but it addresses one of the most consistent triggers behind nighttime symptoms, and for many people it produces a real, noticeable difference within the first week of consistently applying it. Before you go, if you have not already, this is a good moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. We break down exactly this kind of practical, medically grounded information every week, the kind of detail that explains not just what to avoid, but why your body reacts the way it does, so you can actually understand your own symptoms instead of just guessing at triggers. Reflux is manageable once you understand the mechanics behind it, and timing your meals in relation to when you lie down is one of the clearest examples of how a small behavioral shift can produce a real physiological result. There is more to learn about how your daily habits interact with this condition, and we will continue breaking that down in the next video. So keep watching to understand your body a little better with each episode.